Back again, back again. What is going on, everyone? The 415ers podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday with you on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Download, rate, and subscribe. 5 stars only. It is Evan Giddings. It is Marc Grandy. Marc, what's going on, my man? How you doing?
Oh, not too much, Evan. Same old, same old. Just getting ready for another weekend of football and excited to get it rolling with you here on the 415ers.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to talk about in 49er land. Obviously, coming off of a tough loss, 28-14 in Week 6 to Atlanta, now 3-3. We're going to get into why you should, as well as shouldn't, maybe feel confident about this team, as well as what are some of the kind of issues that we talked about on Monday as far as comebacks with the 49ers are concerned. But where we want to start today is with George Kittle. Because George Kittle, after the Falcons game, was talking to reporters on Sunday and mentioned the fact that, quote, the 49ers have a standard that we play at. We play at a very high level with a lot of energy, 100% effort in every single play. I don't know if we gave that today. Now, that's something that a lot of fans might also align with. And quite frankly, also the team just looked like based on the lopsided loss to Atlanta. But what was interesting is that Kyle Shanahan, then earlier this week in his own press conference, kind of refuted that. He said essentially, like, I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like we didn't give 100% effort on Sunday. And that kind of perked people's ears because you got a head coach that's evidently not on the same page with his number one tight end, a leader on the team, core member of the group, or vice versa. But I'm curious what you made of it, Marc, because I thought it was much to do about nothing when Kittle said it, because that's kind of how I felt. But then when Kyle Shanahan doubles back and says that's not actually how I feel, then I start to wonder, okay, well, what's really going on here?
I'm not sure I read into it all that much. You're right. It is kind of interesting that head coach and star offensive player are disagreeing there. But Shanahan also did say, after saying he disagrees with Kittle there, that he likes that George Kittle said that. He quote, "I like George saying that. That's to me how you feel, especially when a team quote kind of dominates the game in terms of how they ran the ball and the amount of carries they got compared to us and the time of possession." So Shanahan is saying, like, I want my star players to feel that way, but he's also not going to throw his players under the bus and say, they came out with terrible effort. He's going to take the blame for the loss. And I think ultimately that's what happened. And beyond that, I'm not sure there's really too much to look into it. Now, I do wonder specifically what George Kittle was referencing. Maybe he saw something from, I don't know, a position group from a few players. Maybe it was just a generalization team wide. He's obviously not going to call out anyone by name. That's just not the 49er way and not the person that George Kittle is. I think that's where I might be curious the most. What did he see specifically to cause him to say that? Was it on the defensive side of the ball? Was it that third and 14 or 15 conversion where Marcus Mariota easily fooled the entire 49ers front? I think you saw Samuel Womack come crashing in from a side, didn't hold the edge, and it turned into an easy run and conversion for Mariota. Was it something there? Was it the run game struggling? Was it some drops in the passing game? I'm not sure exactly what he's referencing, but that would be what I'm most interested in. Who was he talking about? What was he talking about? And less so about the disagreement, because I'm not sure that Kyle Shanahan is in a position to say, yeah, they didn't play hard enough. And I think at the same time, he's just giving the credit to the Falcons, which they certainly deserve, rushing the ball 40 times and controlling that game from start to finish. So I'm not, too interested in how Kyle Shanahan feels about that. I'm more so just wondering what George Kittle saw.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that you have a player on the field who, in a lot of ways, embodies intensity,
Yeah.
especially with your team in George Kittle. And you have a head coach who, I mean, just being honest, like, is not that intense of an individual. So, and from that sense, maybe it's also much to do about nothing because, look, you got a guy who feels like he didn't give maybe his max effort today because his max effort is incredibly high. And Shanahan is saying, well, I thought we were, pretty much where we're always supposed to be, which is even keeled, according to him. And that's where he felt like the team was entering headspace wise. And, you know, the chips fell and they didn't turn out in the 49ers' favor. I do think that the answer, though, from Shanahan is one that is apropos for him and his head coaching style. But I think that's also a lot of the issue with from fans with him is the fact that, I mean, he, like you said, he talked about, wanting his players to feel like that, but it doesn't feel like he does. And not that your head coach should be, screaming up and down the sidelines or getting into press conferences and being a big rah-rah guy, but I just guess that after a loss in which the 49ers pretty much got their asses kicked by a team that we both believe to be not terrible, but inferior to them, even with the injuries, I guess people were just hoping that, there might be a little more fire lit under Shanahan, especially coming into a big week in week 7, where you got a potential Super Bowl contender down the line and one that has already beaten you in the Super Bowl in Kansas City.
Well, I think I would respond to that with two things. First of all, what Kyle Shanahan says to the media generally does not represent what he's saying to his team internally. He very well could have ripped his team, as hard as we've seen him all year, internally in the locker room after the game, after breaking down film right now down in Santa Clara. We really have no way of knowing that. The Niners are in a tight ship. Generally, things do not get out like that. So I wouldn't say that didn't happen entirely. And I don't think he's not the guy that's going to trash his team in the media, and maybe trash isn't the right word, but he's not going to say those kinds of things right after the game, the day after the game on a conference call to the media for everyone to hear. He's going to, if he feels the need to do that sort of thing, I think he's going to do it internally. And second, I would ask you, I mean, did you see a lack of intensity? Did you see a team that didn't come out with the right energy? I'm not so sure I saw that. I saw an injury depleted team on the second week of a 2-week East Coast trip against a decent team, but with a really good run game who controlled the game on the ground. I'm not sure it's anything, too out of the ordinary. Certainly, you would have hoped that the team could have, one, ran the ball better, and two, slowed down the run better on the other side of the ball. But I don't know about you. I didn't see like any red flags popping out to me saying, oh my God, this team simply just wasn't ready. They are, the head coach didn't get them ready. They're not energized. They're not ready. They're slow out of the gates. I didn't really see that. I just think it was
Really?
more the circumstances. Yeah, no, I didn't see a lack of effort or
You didn't
energy.
see a lack of focus, like a lack of discipline. Like, to me, those are all things that are wrapped up under the guise of intensity, and that's the reason why I felt like they found themselves in a hole. Now, I think after they went down 14-0, they played pretty well, and especially in the second half. Like, they sort of flip-flopped. The offense played well in the first half, didn't play well in the second half. Defense didn't have a good start to the game. Defense did a good job the last half of the game. But when you're not having the same sort of complementary football, especially in the 49ers, and you are injury depleted, like that to me does maybe not scream, oh my gosh, like this team was just, went out there and thought they could kind of cakewalk past the Falcons. But there was certainly a lack of intensity compared to where we'd seen the team in prior weeks.
I don't know. I mean, you're playing without 6 starters at the start of the game on defense. A few others go out. I mean, you saw many, many snaps for players like Akeem Spence and Kamoko Ture, Kerry Hyder, and Hassan Ridgeway all got a lot of snaps. You saw Oren Burks and Demetrius Flanagan Fowles get defensive snaps. They're generally only special teamers. Same thing for George Odom. You saw some Tarvarius Moore snaps. I mean, this is a unit that had to throw in guys that generally in a perfect world would never see a defensive snap. So maybe it's a cop out for me to say injuries. And maybe, maybe they were a little slow getting out of the blocks. That 14-0 deficit. A lot of that was because of the Jeff Wilson Jr. fumble, and no one has a single bad word to say about Jeff Wilson Jr. He's beloved in the locker room, and I don't think a fumble necessarily means like you didn't come with the right energy. I don't know. I think it's simpler than a lot of people are making it. I think it's good that George Kittle feels that way. He's probably going to get on his teammates about it if he honestly feels that way, which I'm sure he does. And they're probably going to come out firing a bit better against Kansas City. They're going to need to, because that's a really good team. But I'm not sure I saw anything that that really worries me in that game related to effort. I think it was just a culmination of a lot of circumstances. And maybe the effort wasn't as good as it should be, but I don't think it was so bad that it deserves, a call out by the head coach.
No, but it wasn't like he was calling anyone out. I'll at least I just felt like all he had to do was simply say, yeah, maybe we didn't give our best effort. George is one of our leaders. He felt like we lacked intensity. He's on the field. I'll roll with his better judgment. To me, that's not calling anyone out. That's just kind of acknowledging what someone's truth is that is on the field and in the huddle. But I don't know. I guess it just seemed like if there are players that have to step up in the stead, like you mentioned, playing snaps that they probably shouldn't be, I feel like that's sort of the time for those team leaders, the Fred Warners, the Drake Greenlaws, on offense, Debo Samuel, Ayuk did play very well. He was one player that we highlighted certainly, that outside of garbage time was dominant against the Falcons. But like we also talked about in our reaction episode over the weekend, like there was a lot of missed tackles. There was a lot of situations where not just backups, but also starting players were getting carried forward on defense. And it just felt like the Falcons, a team that has a pretty simple equation to try and beat you weren't able to stop that. And I don't know if it comes down to simply just not having all of your guys or, there being a lack of intensity, but it felt like there was something missing there. And maybe it's just an oversimplification to put it under the umbrella of intensity. But I think that's more what George Kittle was talking about and why I was curious that Shanahan didn't affirm that, because to me, it did look like there was an ingredient missing, certainly on the 49ers side. And that's why the Falcons were able to just pretty much roll up and down the field in the first half offensively, right before the half, and then out of the break, and really capitalize on all of the mistakes that the 49ers made, especially as far as drops and then ill-timed penalties.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I'm not sure. I mean, you mentioned, Fred Warner on the defensive side and Debo Samuel on offense. This is a moment when they're down so many other starters. They've got to step up and they've got to bring that energy and that passion. And, I'm sure they did. I would, offer back at you. I don't know how much more you can ask them to do. I mean, specifically Fred Warner, who's like seemingly one of the last guys standing from a great defensive unit this early in the season. And he's really never missed a game in his 49ers career. Um, I mean, there's only so much he can do, and he's been fantastic this season. I don't know. I get that, when you see a team and specifically, a team like the Falcons, less talented than the 49ers, that's for sure. Now, maybe when you consider who was available in this game, the talent discrepancy probably is a lot less and maybe closer to even, but certainly there's an expectations difference. I feel like, us and Niner fans and other people in the media want to find, a reason and a scapegoat. And the scapegoat this time, George Kittle said it himself. It was a lack of energy. And, Kyle Shanahan, I'm not saying you're saying this, but Kyle Shanahan needs to make sure his team is ready, needs to come out with better energy. You can't let that happen, Kyle Shanahan. I don't know. I think sometimes it's simpler than what we make it out to be. Again, I think it was a confluence of issues, a long road trip, a team that runs the ball really well, going up against a depleted defensive unit. And again, I'm not saying that the energy was perfect. It probably wasn't. I mean, I think under the circumstances, probably hard to be perfect in that regard. But I don't think it was, reason number one why the 49ers lost this game. The reason number one they lost this game is probably because they couldn't run the ball on their offensive side and Jeff Wilson Jr. fumbled. And maybe your argument is, well, that's an energy issue. I'm not so certain about that, but I think it's relatively simple that, sometimes football is a funny game, weird things happen, and that's an instance of this one.
Well, if football's a funny game the next 2 weeks, the 49ers are going to go into the bye 3-5. So that's the reality of the situation. Um, and not to try and I'm not trying to throw anybody on the bus. I just thought it was interesting. because that's an issue. If it is, that certainly cannot show up on Sunday when you got the defending,
Oh yeah.
well, last three conference championship teams coming in the Kansas City Chiefs. Like that can't happen.
No, it can't. And they're coming in off a loss as well. And, history suggests you don't want to play Kyle Shanahan off a loss. History, demands that you do not want to play Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes off a loss. So you're going to have, a couple of teams upset at themselves. And generally, I would take an angry Andy Reid over an angry Kyle Shanahan. So it should be an interesting matchup.